Hello. So today we're going to go over how to do a closing problem. Now, in our pre-licensing course, we've already gone over a lot of this math. This problem is about taking it, putting it all together, similar to what you'll see on a closing disclosure once you help people buy and sell houses. So let's start with the problem. You see it here, but I'll read it out loud to you. The buyers have agreed to purchase the seller's home for $120,000, closing on April 15th, and have 30% as a down payment. They will receive a fixed-rate loan at 8%, a 1% origination fee with an interim interest collected at closing. The bank will charge private mortgage insurance if required. The following fees should be reflected on the HUD. Attorney's fees, $500. Credit report, $35 POC, appraisal $300 POC, survey $100, recording fees $17 for the deed of trust and $20 for the deed. Title insurance will be issued to the buyers at the standard rate of $2 per 1,000. Earnest money deposit of $1,000 is being held by the listing broker, and due diligence was $350. There is a loan payoff of $36,000 with accrued interest at 7.15%, 6% commission, $75 for deed preparation, and the cost of revenue stamps. The assessed value of the property is $76,500, and the combined city and county tax rate is $1.32 per 100. How much cash must the buyers pay at closing, and how much will the sellers receive at closing? So you see, as we went along, I highlighted everything that is going to be important and going on our sheet. So now we're just going to go each item by item and put it on our worksheet. So we start with our purchase price. Our purchase price is $120,000. So when you do this, ask yourself, where did the money come from and who did the money go to? So once you know where the money is coming from and who the money's going to, you're going to add it to our worksheet. Remember, there are debits, and that means somebody owes money, and there are credits, which means somebody is receiving money. All right. So our first item is the $120,000 purchase price. That is money that the buyer owes to the seller. The seller is going to receive that $120,000. So we'll put this on our sheet as purchase price, $120,000. It is a buyer debit, money that the buyer owes, and a seller credit. Our next item, closing on April 15th, we don't necessarily need that right now, but I will put it up here in my corner just so that I remember what the closing date is. And then it says we have 30% down as a down payment. Well, if you're putting down 30%, that means you're getting an LTV or a loan of 70%. So we need to find 70% of our sales price. So our sales price was $120,000. Multiply that by 70%, and you find out that our loan is going to be for $84,000. We're going to go ahead and put this on our chart, and we've got to think about it. It's going to be a buyer credit because the buyer doesn't have $84,000. They need $84,000 to pay that $120,000 purchase price. So this is going to be a buyer credit. It is not a seller debit because the seller is not the one who's bringing the money. The bank is. And you see there's no line here for the bank, so we just leave it alone. Our next item is the 1% loan origination fee. So our loan is for $84,000. We're going to multiply that by 1%, and that gives us a loan origination fee of $840. The bank is the one asking the buyer to pay this. So there's no sense in the seller paying it. This is going to be a buyer debit for $840. Next, we have interim interest. Interim interest is the interest that the buyer owes starting the day of closing until the end of the month. And remember, we're using a 30-day month. So if the buyer is buying this house on April 15th, they want the money to show up on the 15th. So that's going to be 16 days that the buyer needs to pay for. So we've got to find 16 days of interest. Well, it doesn't just tell us a daily interest amount, we have to find it. We know our loan is for $84,000 and the interest rate is for 8%. Well, when you look and do that math, that means we have a total annual interest of $67.20, and that's for a year. If I take that and divide it by 360 days, I find out that we've got $18.66 per day for interest. Multiply that by 16 days, and that gives us a total of $298.72. This is money that the buyer owes to the bank. So we have a buyer debit for interim interest for $298.72. Next item that we have is going to be our private mortgage insurance if it's required. Remember, you usually pay private mortgage insurance or PMI if the buyer is putting down less than 20%. In this case, the buyer is putting down 30%, so we don't need to worry about it. The next fees are going to be the attorney's fees. That's $500, and remember the buyer pays for the attorney. So it's a buyer debit for $500. Then it says credit report, $35 POC. POC stands for paid outside of closing, which means it's not monies that are collected today. When you get into the real world and you have a closing disclosure, the government and the bank needs to show that these monies were collected from the buyer, but for our needs today, we're not going to put that on there. So we don't do the $35 credit report, and we're not going to do the appraisal for $300 either because it also says POC. We have the survey for $100. It is the buyer that got a new survey, so we'll add that for $100. Then we have recording fees, $17 for the deed of trust. Remember, deed of trust is basically a mortgage here in North Carolina. So we're going to go ahead and make that a buyer debit for $17. And then $20 for the deed. Well, that is the deed being recorded so that the buyer has the title so they can give title over to the bank. So that's going to be $20, another buyer debit. So our next section says title insurance will be issued to the buyers at the standard rate of $2 per 1,000. Well, if it is $2 per 1,000, then we know it's going to be $1 per 500. So we'll take our sales price. Remember, our sales price is $120,000. And we'll divide that by 500, and that will give us a total of $240. This is the buyer that's getting title insurance, so it's to cover them just in case something is wrong with the title, so we'll add that as a buyer debit. Earnest money deposit was $1,000. That is money that the buyer paid that went into a trust account, and now that they're buying the house, they get that money back. So we'll have $1,000 as a buyer credit. Due diligence will also be a buyer credit. This $350 is coming back to the buyer because they did not walk away. Now, the due diligence check was made out to the seller directly, so the seller needs to return that. This is going to be a seller debit. The seller is the one who has a loan to pay off, so we'll go ahead and put this $36,000 into the seller debit. And there's accrued interest. Now, interim interest was what the buyer paid from the day of closing until the end of the month. Accrued interest is what the seller owes because when they made a payment on April 1st, they were really paying for March. So they still owe monies from the 1st of April up until the 15th. So we need to figure out how much daily interest is on this loan and figure out how much 15 days would be worth. So we know the loan payoff is $36,000 and it has a rate of 7.15%. That will give us annual interest of $2,574. Well, if I divide that by 360, that's going to give me $7.15 per day, and we need 15 days, and that's going to give me $107.25. Since it's owed by the seller, we're going to go ahead and put this $107.25 into the seller debit column. Next, we have a 6% commission. I know you know how to find that. So we'll take the $120,000, multiply it by 6%, and the total commission will be $7,200. That $7,200 is owed by the seller, so that will be a seller debit. The seller will also pay for the $75 for deed preparation, so that will be $75 seller debit, and the cost of revenue stamps. Well, revenue stamps are the same as excise tax, and that's going to be $1 per 500 of the sales price, which we already did that same math up there, so it will be $240. That will be a seller debit. Now we have our last calculation. It says the assessed value of the property is $76,500 and that the tax rate is $1.32. So we know we're going to pay $1.32 for every 100 of the assessed value. How many hundreds are in 76,500? We'll take that 76,500, divide it by 100, quick little math here, and we know that there are 765 hundreds in 76,500. We'll multiply that times $1.32, and we will get $1,009.80. This $1,009.80 would be what you owe for the entire year. We're not collecting for a year. We're just going through and we're collecting for a portion of this year. We're collecting what the seller would owe to the buyer because the buyer is the one who's going to be responsible for paying this tax bill at the end of the year. So we'll take this $1,009, divide it by 360 to go ahead and get $2.80 per day. And we've got 3 months and 15 days. You've got 30 days in January, 30 days in February, 30 days in March, that's 90, plus the 15 days in April for 105 days, for a total of $294 and 53 cents. So we know that $294 and 53 cents is what the seller needs to give to the buyer, making it a seller debit and a buyer credit. So now we've got these totals. We're going to add up everything in a buyer debit line. And when you do, you find a buyer debit total of $122,015.72. We also know that there's buyer credits because we've got the loan, we have the earnest money deposit, and the due diligence deposit all returned back. So the credits that the buyer is receiving is going to be $85,350. If you subtract that $85,000 from the $122,000, we find out that the buyer needs to bring to closing $36,665.72. Remember that the sales price was $120,000 and then they got a loan for $84,000? Well, then that means this number also includes our down payment. We don't need to add the down payment to our chart because this number is what we're finding. How much between the down payment and all of the closing costs does this buyer need to bring to closing? Well, we're going to do the same thing for the seller. We know the seller was supposed to receive $120,000, but the seller owes some money. We know the seller owed money for the commissions, accrued interest, the loan payoff, all of those things. And that seller debit total is $44,266.78. So when you subtract those two numbers, we find out that the seller is going to receive a check after it records for $75,000 or $75,733.22. So those are the two answers to our problems. Remember, it asked how much will the buyer need to bring and how much will the seller need to bring. I hope this helps. I hope you were able to follow along, and if you have any questions, as usual, just ask.